Good evening, everyone. I will call the Dublin City Council meeting of Monday, November the 18th to order. Ann, would you please call the roll?
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. It is my understanding we have the members of Troop 185. Is that all you guys? Just nod your heads if you're with Troop 185. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys could all lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Come forward.
Yeah, why don't you guys come on up here? Come on up. Everybody come up here. The flag is back here.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So what brings you guys in? Is anybody sort of a designated spokesman here? All right, how about you? You be the spokesman. Go over there where that microphone is and sort of tell us what brings you in and what you guys are all about.
Your name and say your name.
I'm Andrew Hayden. So we're doing communications merit badge, some of us, and community in the nation or something. Great, yeah, okay. Citizenship, my bad.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate you guys being here. Well, I know that most of us participated in our very special corporate resident Wendy's 50th birthday, and I think Mary Shell and Blair Luciano, where are Mary? Are you back there? Blair, come on up. We spent some time with them last Friday. We have a proclamation here for you guys, and then we're going to put you on the spot. Whereas on November 15th, 1969, Dave Thomas opened the first Wendy's restaurant at 257 East Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, naming it after his 8-year-old daughter, who was nicknamed Wendy, and it culminated a dream that Dave had since he was 8 years old. And whereas from day one, Wendy's motto has been quality is our recipe, and 50 years later, Wendy's mission is still the same, to craft delicious quality hamburgers made from fresh, never frozen beef, and to serve them fast in a clean and comfortable environment. And whereas Wendy's continues to uphold Dave's values, quality is our recipe, treat people with respect, do the right thing, profit means growth, and give something back. And whereas on July of 1992, Dave Thomas established the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, a public charity with one goal, to help every child in foster care find a permanent loving home. And whereas through its tremendous support of the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program, Wendy's continues to commit to achieve Dave Thomas's vision that every child has a permanent home and a loving family. And whereas 1,000 children in Ohio are now in loving adoptive homes due to the work of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption and the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program. And whereas what started as one restaurant now spans the globe with more than 6,700 locations and is proudly headquartered in Dublin, Ohio. And whereas Wendy's remains committed to providing great value, investing in quality food, delivering exceptional service, and elevating its restaurants with the aim to becoming the world's most thriving and most beloved restaurant brand. Now, therefore, I, Gregory S. Peterson, Mayor of the City of Dublin, Ohio, on behalf of Dublin City Council, do hereby congratulate the Wendy's Company on 50 years of outstanding achievement in the City of Dublin and wish the Wendy's Company and its employees continued success, signed this 18th day of November, 2019. There's another one for your wall. How are you? Good to see you.
Well, my name is Mary Shell. I'm Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Wendy's Company, and Blair Luciani also works on our team. She's Manager of Public Affairs as well. I've been with the company for 25 years, had the privilege of working regularly and closely with Dave Thomas. So on behalf of Wendy's, we want to formally thank the City of Dublin and all of you for your tremendous support. Dublin wouldn't be Dublin without Wendy's. Wendy's wouldn't be Wendy's without Dublin. And I believe, Mayor, at our meeting last week, you mentioned that when Wendy's broke ground on our corporate headquarters, there were 1,000 people living in the Dublin area. So I think it's been very exciting for us to grow with the city as well. And hopefully we've contributed to some of your success. We certainly had really a big week last week. Every week that year, we celebrate Founders Week to remember our beloved founder, Dave Thomas. And this year, it culminated on November 15th, which was our actual 50th anniversary of our founding, the first day the restaurant opened downtown. I'm also chairman of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, and as you mentioned, yes, we just had our 1,000th Ohio adoption as a direct result of our foundation, and in particular a cause and a program called Wendy's Wonderful Kids. Because of Wendy's Wonderful Kids and its growth, we are happy that you know that the foundation is going to headquarter back here in Dublin. They've bought a new building. It's being renovated, and we certainly appreciate the city's support for that as well. The foundation also is 25 years old, and we are on track, we believe, in the next year or so to achieve our 10,000th adoption. We're singularly focused on foster care adoption in the U.S. and Canada. And so again, because of your tremendous support, we're able to grow, the foundation's able to grow. We call Dublin home, and we deeply appreciate your commendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Blair, do you have anything to add, or are you just going to ditto?
I'm just here for moral support.
Must just here for moral support. Wendy's represents all that is good about our corporate residents, and it is such a I mean, just think about that. 1,000 children have been adopted because of your efforts. I mean, hamburgers are good, don't get me wrong, but 1,000 loving homes is at a totally different level of success.
Right now, we're selling Frosty key tags, so for $2, you can buy a Frosty key tag at any Wendy's. It's good for free Frosties for the entire year, and all proceeds go to support the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. So more Frosties means more adoptions, and we encourage you to give that a shot.
Wow, that's fantastic. Where do you go? Can you get that at
Any restaurant.
Any restaurant? You buy a keychain.
It's a key tag that goes on your keychain.
Key tag.
When you with purchase.
With purchase.
You show them your Frosty key tag, and it's always good for a free small Frosty.
That's right. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. That is really a commitment and investment in what matters.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Mike? We can set you back if you put one of those out.
I'll take that back to our marketing team and see maybe during National Hamburger Month in May we could come up with something like that.
It is such, and when they ran the tape of your annual meeting, was it in September? Mm-hmm. Was it down in Florida? Mm-hmm. Where was it? It was someplace warm. Really fantastic. Such a professional organization. I mean, it is top shelf. There's nobody better than a corporation in the way you run your business, and the employees are they are so into it, and it is a really fantastic place.
Wendy's is 95% owned and operated by franchisees, and we're very proud of that as well. A franchise organization means lots of men and women have the chance to own their own business and be part of a bigger system. So we're proud to be the largest franchisor in Ohio, and to be here in Dublin as our home.
It is absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you,
Blair.
everyone.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Now, if we could have the Dublin Jerome High School girls tennis team come forward. Where are you all? And Coach, maybe you could introduce yourself and your champions here to us.
Sure, it'd be my pleasure. First off, definitely want to thank Mr. Mayor and City Council for allowing us to come in. Also, Nancy Richardson for arranging this as well, and taking time out of your busy agenda to acknowledge us here. Behind me here, I have 4 special ladies. These are members of our tennis team. The team as a whole went 18-1 this season, and we were OCC champs for the 16th straight season. And for those of you doing the math, Dublin Jerome has been open 15 years, and this is our 16th season of play. So every year that Jerome has been in existence, the girls tennis team has won the OCC title. And all 7
people got the other teams have to be so tired of you guys.
Yeah. We realigned this year, and I know some of the teams, we had most of the teams still stay in it, but some of the teams that got out of it were probably pretty happy.
Yeah.
And then we had 7 girls, these 4 plus 3 of their teammates, also 7 girls make up the whole starting lineup for a match, and so all 7 were voted first team, all OCC. These 4 behind me, what made these ladies so special is we finished first and second in the states for the state title for doubles. Taking the state championship was Lalasa Nagaretti, and Arya Dudapala. And then the runners-up were seniors Reagan Reeser and Catherine Wong. Last year, I believe we set a record where we had you enter 3 singles participants in the state tournament, and all 3 of our singles players made it to states. So we were wondering what we were going to do to top that, and so we decided to be greedy and take the first and second places in doubles this year, which is doesn't happen too often. It's happened before, but it doesn't happen all that often. So, and again, these 4 are just a great representation of not only Dublin Jerome, but of the city of Dublin as well. And we stress that all the time, that every time that they're playing and out, that they're not only representing themselves and their coach and their families, but also the city as well. And I don't think you'll find 4 better student ambassadors than these 4 behind me.
That's fantastic, Coach. And can you introduce each one of them again?
Sure.
For me and go right down?
Going in order, Reagan Reeser, Catherine Wong, Lalasa Nagaretti, Arya Dudapala.
And you have, if I would have handed you my proclamation, you basically covered everything that was in here, so I'm not going to duplicate efforts and read it again. But I do have a proclamation for you on behalf of City Council. We're so proud of you and your team and what you represent, and hard work and dedication and commitment and success, ultimately, which doesn't necessarily always flow all together, and it did in your case. So we have this proclamation. We wish you our deepest congratulations.
Thank you
for coming. I'll read the now hereby. Now, therefore, I, Gregory S. Peterson, Mayor of the City of Dublin, Ohio, on behalf of Dublin City Council, do hereby congratulate the Dublin Jerome High School girls tennis team on its outstanding accomplishments for its 2019 season, signed this 18th day of November, 2019.
Thank you.
You want a photo, Coach? Sure.
Coach, I see you have some parents out there taking a video. You know, this is live streamed, and they can go to the website and see the actual video of this once it's posted, so.
Perfect. All right.
Congratulations. Thank you. Alrighty. Now we're on to the citizen comment portion of the agenda. We have a little sign-up sheet out there for people to sign up. Nobody signed up, but I will ask if anybody has anything they want to talk about for 5 minutes. You can come up and we'll listen to you. Seeing no hands, I will move on to, I did? Sir, come on up. If we could get your name and address.
Randall Ayers, 5940 Roundstone Place. Dublin.
Thank you for coming in. What's on your mind?
Well, I was in the earlier workshop, and I was kind of disappointed at how little AP was able to respond to a lot of your questions. I would think you'd be frustrated, especially on the north side of Shire Rings, where the poles actually were going to be, whether they're 5 feet off the pavement or 45 feet off the pavement, and what they can do. That makes a big difference as far as aesthetics. I think everybody in the Ballantrae area is all interested about the aesthetics. And I thought they should have been more responsive to your questions and should have been better prepared. But I know the city does have a chance for the Ohio Siting Board, if they disagree, to go to the board and represent the city of Dublin and the residents in trying to get better information before the Ohio Siting Board approves or disapproves something. So I would encourage you to do that.
Thank you for your comments, and I can tell you that there are plenty of questions that we are still looking for answers for. Put it that way. Tom, come on up.
Tom Holton, 5957 Roundstone Place in Dublin. Thank you.
Sure.
Mayor and Council, I appreciate the opportunity to have that work session. I thought that was very useful and heard a lot of information that I wish AEP had shared with us before, particularly around the issue of transmission versus distribution lines. That was something we could have heard in the session that I think back in September, that would have been very useful information. We could have asked more questions, smarter questions earlier, particularly around the burial, the underground installation versus overhead, and would have known a lot more earlier than we did tonight. And seeing the difference between the poles, the 50-foot pole that we have today, because as I think most of you know, I live in Ballantrae, and versus the 90-foot poles, that's a huge difference. Now, even though as Mr. Keenan said, they're a much simpler and cleaner line, definitely. There's no doubt about that compared to the poles now. But as you know, when you are used to a pole, the ones we have now, they're almost invisible when you become used to them. We know that the underground installation was approved by council about 17 years ago. In fact, about 17 years ago today, the minutes that were provided by Mr. McDaniel today for me to study, the council did approve the underground installation along Emerald Parkway, or in that vicinity, between the Davidson distribution center, I call it, and the one on Emerald Parkway. And that the city paid the difference between the cost of the underground installation and aerial, if I understood it correctly. And the reason given by Mr. McDaniel in the minutes was the goal, as I understood it correctly, the goal was to clean up the line clutter in the city in keeping with aesthetic standards. So I think many of us in Ballantrae, those of us who've been discussing this, feel that the one argument we have is the aesthetic standards, that the aesthetic standards that the 90-foot poles are not in keeping with aesthetic standards that the city has in the rest of the community. We take a look over at the perimeter in the vicinity of Dublin Methodist Hospital, Kroger Shopping Center. There are no overhead lines there at all. And Mr. McDaniel explains that there's reasons for that. They're not an apples-to-apples comparison between what is, or the installation of distribution versus transmission lines there versus Shire rings. I understand, well, I acknowledge that. I don't understand it as well as all of you will. But still, the aesthetics are kept over in that part of the community, and we'd like to see something similar over on our side of the community. I'm in favor of option 4, which is a partial burial underground installation between around the service center vicinity, or just past the service center, down to approximately Cosgray Road. And I hope the council will consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you coming in. Ordinance is second reading, public hearing, ordinance 62-19, Ann.
Authorizing the city manager to execute necessary conveyance documents and to accept conveyance of a 0.072 acre fee simple warranty deed for right-of-way without limitation of existing access rights from CBJ on High LLC from the property located at 158 South High Street.
Paul.
Members of council, I have no new information to report on this item beyond that which was reported at the first reading. Staff does recommend adoption this evening. Be glad to answer any questions
Any
you might
questions
have.
from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Amaros Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. 63-19, Ann.
Amending Chapter 35 of the Codified Ordinances to revise the fee and service charge revenue cost comparison system and establishing a schedule of fees and service charges for City of Dublin services.
Matt.
Good evening, members of council. Ordinance 63-19 was amended at the first hearing on November 4th. The motion to amend specified that the fees associated with commercial PACE projects would remain $1,000. Appendix A of Ordinance 63-19 has been amended to reflect that motion. There are no additional changes since the first hearing.
Questions from council?
No, thank you for doing that. I think one of the things that we requested last time is that you'd keep us updated sort of the end of year, see how we're doing against, because we recognize that the cost does exceed this. So if we could do that as we continue to do these, which is a wonderful thing, that'd be great.
Absolutely. The service will be included in the cost study moving forward and studied as part of that process.
Any other questions? Ann?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Amherst Grooms?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Bosa?
Yes.
64-19.
Adopting the annual operating budget for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2020.
Matt?
Good evening, again, members of council. There was some discussion at the first hearing on this ordinance regarding one-time or non-recurring revenue and expenditures in 2020, as well as a request to examine our spending trend and what that may mean moving forward. So this presentation will address those three ideas. First, we'll address the non-recurring revenues and expenditures in the 2020 budget. The first item of note is that the city does not typically have non-recurring revenues. The only real example of this would be the sale of city property, particularly land. Additionally, revenue collected from land purchases is typically returned to the fund that provided for the purchase of the land, and this has historically not been the general fund. Therefore, the city having any non-recurring revenue is a rare event, but it is planned to occur in 2020. In 2020, the city has a number of non-recurring expenditures, particularly expenditures associated with the 27th pay period and the final payment on the Regal property purchase. In addition, there are contractual obligations beginning in 2020 associated with park maintenance, economic development, and the city manager's office that are not planned to be recurring in nature. As the slide demonstrates, those revenues and expenditures are well matched in 2020. Additionally, contractual services planned in the 2020 operating budget total $18.6 million. A majority of this spending in this category in many departments is utilized to provide what could be considered required basic services, such as legal review, investment and banking services, commercial and residential plan review, etc. But in several departments, such as engineering or planning, contractual services are more closely aligned with project execution planned for that particular year than daily operations. If it were to become necessary to quickly reduce expenditures, many of these project-specific contracts could be delayed or eliminated without significantly impacting services provided to our residents, at least in the short term. These expenditures are not necessarily non-recurring, as these departments are planning new projects every year, but to the extent that these contracts can be delayed or eliminated if needed without impacting the delivery of basic services, it does represent a potential cushion between any potential revenue decline and expenditure reductions that would impact service delivery to our residents. The top green line on this graph shows revenue from 2016 through 2018. All revenue during this time frame was recurring, so the green line represents both amounts in this graph. Total actual expenditures are represented by the dark red line, and the total recurring expenditures are represented by the bottom light red line. Recurring expenditures increased 2.2% in 2017 and 1.2% in 2018. The difference between these total expenditures in 16 and 18 was the purchase of capital assets, and in 2017 there was an unusual tax refund of $2 million. Typically, actual expenditures for all tax refunds across the full year total $3.1 million, so that was an unusual event to say the least. These slides demonstrate that we're not using non-recurring revenue to provide for recurring expenditures, and as shown on the previous slide, non-recurring revenue and expenditures in 2020 are well matched. Historically, our expenditures have exhibited a stronger tendency to be non-recurring in nature than our revenues.
Matt, may I ask you one question?
Sure.
For the recurring expenditures, does debt service fall under that on this slide?
Debt service would be part of the capital improvement program and isn't included in the operating budget per se as a revenue or as an expenditure.
I didn't know if this was purely if these were all reoccurring expenditures or only relevant.
This analysis is only going to focus on the general fund and then those 200 special revenue funds that make up a majority of the operating budget. Anything that's from a TIF fund, the capital fund, the debt service fund are not included in an operating budget.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt, would not the dollars required to be added to the debt service fund come from the general fund if it were for non-TIF related things? I mean,
they would first flow through probably the 401, the capital improvements tax fund, after the TIF funds, the capital improvements. And if there was, for some reason, there would be no revenue there, then you would have to ultimately, as all funds are, backstopped by the general fund. That would be unlikely.
Thank you.
Sure. Beyond recurring and non-recurring revenue and expenditure discussion, an example of an examination of spending trends was requested. So this slide represents our operating revenue with the black line at the top, and our operating expenditures are represented by the stacked bar graph. The top of the stacked bar graph represents the total operating expenditures. This data is from actual expenditures for 2016 through 2018. By examining the data in this fashion, we can kind of cut through some of the noise and get to a trend analysis that I think we were looking for, but still remain at a relatively high level. So the information on this slide places expenditures related to other charges and expenses and capital expenditures in gray and removes them from our analysis. These tend to be the non-recurring type charges and aren't really representative of our daily operational costs, the way the other three categories are. The categories that remain include personal services, contractual services, and supplies, and these are the categories that most closely align with our expenditures to provide city services and daily operations. The orange line shows the trend in expenditures related to these expenditure categories. By focusing on just these categories, we see the emergence of a trend in expenditures. This trend shows an increase in 2017 of 4% and 4.1% in 2018. And this expenditure trend is narrowing the difference between operating revenues and expenditures over this time frame. So I think it's important to discuss 3 points when examining this trend. First is that we have to acknowledge that expenditures most closely aligned with our services and daily operations have been increasing at a rate greater than our operating revenues. Obviously, if this situation were to occur indefinitely, we would eventually have a threat to our ability to maintain a balanced budget. Despite this imbalance in expenditure growth as it compares to revenue growth, operating revenues have continued to exceed operating expenditures in each of these years and are expected to continue to do so. Operating revenues and operating expenditures and any trends within them are and will continue to be monitored as we bring forward proposed operating budgets this year and in the future. Second, the narrowing of the positive variance between operating revenues and expenditures is mainly due to the flat revenue line. There are strong indicators pointing to having a cautious level of optimism for the future regarding our operating revenues. As noted in the October financial report, year-to-date income tax revenue for 2019 is up 6.2% compared to 2018. If you take out some of the net profit earnings, we're still up 2.7% year-to-date compared to 2018. As you will recall, for 2020, at our second council work session, operating revenues were discussed in significant detail regarding the projected 7% increase in 2020 operating revenues as compared to 2019. So we do believe and we are projecting some operating revenue increases, and we're seeing some of that this year and projecting it for next. Finally, economic development agreements approved by Council in 2019 have identified over 2,100 new jobs that will be created in 2020 or 21. These new jobs and the increase in income tax revenues in 19 and the projected increase in 2020 operating revenues call into question a continued trend line of flat revenue. Finally, Council and the administration have taken proactive action to ensure that expenditure growth related to daily operations remains as flat as possible while maintaining the city's current service levels. As Council is aware, one of the primary drivers in this increase is salary and benefit increases, and particularly the addition of new staff. Regarding salary increases during this time frame and proposed in 2020, current staff have generally been receiving around 2%. The growth is therefore being driven by benefit increases and the addition of new staff. In both of these areas, Council and the administration are taking action. Council and staff have already identified that a discussion on health care benefits will occur in 2020 and potential plan changes will be evaluated. With regard to new staff, as Council will recall in the initial budget discussion, several positions not included in the proposed budget were put forward for discussion, including a senior engineer, 2 natural history interpreter, and a data analytics specialist. Ultimately, it was determined not to move forward with these positions at this time. Of the 10 new full-time positions contained in the proposed 2020 operating budget, only 1 does not contain a full or significant offset in costs associated with funding the position. By carefully limiting the growth of new staff positions, we continue to limit the growth of current and future budget expenditures and refrain from increasing that trend line any more than is minimally necessary. And finally, we'll take a look at how this trend might impact future years. I think it's important before we begin examining this analysis to make a few points. And the first is that the analysis is extremely sensitive. What I mean is that very reasonable small changes in revenue or expenditure levels compounded over 3 years can make a large difference in the data selected. That being said, the projected expenditures presented are based on the historical spend of the original budget as compared to actual expenditures, and projected revenues are based on year-to-date actual income tax revenues for 2019, and a 2% growth on the recurring income tax estimate for 2019, so separating out some of those net profit gains that we saw in October, using that as the base for 2020 and 2021. The result of these decisions is likely a conservative projection on expenditures and revenues, and it likely represents a conservative scenario for 2020 and 2021, absent a third-party event acting upon the model. So this graph displays the budgeted and projected revenue for 2019 through 2021. The green lines represent revenue, while the red lines represent expenditures. The dark lines represent projections, while the lighter lines represent budgeted numbers. As you can see, our budgeted expenditures continue to exceed our budgeted revenue through 2021, while our projected revenues remain $4 to $6 million ahead of our projected expenditures during this time frame. Breaking this out a little bit similar to how we examined the trend analysis in the previous slide, this graph combines all that information previously provided and projects revenues and expenditures through 2021. The black line at the top of the graph represents the same revenue line as displayed on the previous graph. The top of the stacked bar chart represents the same figure as the projected expenditure line on the previous chart. As before, capital charges and other expenditures are grayed out and removed from the analysis to examine the underlying trend in expenditures most closely aligned with city operations. As before, from 2016 to 2018, personal services, contractual services, and supplies increased just over 4%. In 2019, I'm projecting an increase of 4.2%, consistent with the previously identified trend. In 2020, due to the non-recurring personal services expenditures associated with 27th pay and the $630,000 in non-recurring contractual services previously identified, that trend line grows to 7.3%. However, once these non-recurring charges are removed for 2021, and the projected increases in these three categories are added, so assuming that we get salary increases in 2021, assuming there's a normal level of benefit increases in 2021, et cetera, for these categories, we see a projected increase of 1.4%. Together, these two amounts kind of trend back to that 4% over the final 2 years. These percentages can be a bit misleading. So this final graph displays the same information, but instead of displaying the percentage, it shows the dollar value of the change in operating revenues and expenditures on a year-over-year basis. This graph and the previous demonstrate that the trend of 4% growth in personal services, contractual services, and supplies needs to be continuously monitored. The difference between operating revenues and expenditures does continue to narrow, but the variance between operating revenues and all operating expenditures continues to be projected positive $4 to $6 million. In closing, I think it's important to acknowledge and monitor the trend in expenditures as compared to revenues, while continuing to take proactive steps to minimize expenditures and increase revenues, making it likely this trend will not continue. The 2020 operating budget, as contained in Ordinance 64-19, maintains our progress towards priorities identified by Council, while also maintaining the high level of city services our residents expect. It also continues our practice of having a balanced budget where actual operating revenues exceed actual operating expenditures, and as this analysis demonstrates, that despite the previously discussed expenditure trends, this situation is not expected to change, as operating revenues are projected to continue to exceed operating expenditures under conservative assumptions through 2021. And I'm available for any questions.
Questions from council?
I just want to say that I think it's prudent that we are adding the new staff, and I think that was a good idea, really. Thank you.
Kath?
Thank you. Matt, thanks very much. I know this took a fair bit of work, and Matt and I have had a couple conversations over the past couple of days, and I really appreciate it. If you want to go back up the last slide you had before this, or the present, that's a good one. I think this is quite a helpful slide, and I so appreciate your work
and hopefully our continued production of this, because it does help us, I think, at a very high level. We're not getting down in the weeds and looking at specific expenditures. But when we see trend lines going like this, it does help us recognize that the cost of running the city as we grow, as needs for park maintenance, as needs for benefits, et cetera, are going to continue to grow at least a 4% clip. And I think, as you say, as those lines come together, it's going to be important for us to watch that. Secondly, I think it also helps us really look at some of those non-recurring things and ask ourselves, are they in fact going to be recurring? And one of the examples that I note is earlier on the increase in park contractual services this year. As we add more parks, as we have aging parks, et cetera, so forth, some of those things, I think, help us get indicators as to, when we look at those lines, are we seeing some permanent shifts there and what that might mean. So for me, I found this helpful to really actually look at the trend lines. I don't want to say that matter most, but help us think about what it takes to run. So I appreciate that. I am comfortable when I see this that there's certainly, from a 2020 perspective, financially still solid, still good, no issues, but appreciate and hope going forward that we really continue to monitor this and as things grow, because, as you said, eventually those lines cross if things don't change. But so appreciate this, and I do think this will be very helpful for us as we move forward. So thank you for that, Matt. I appreciate it. Matt, I have just one question about the 1.5% reduction in 2021. Is that just a conservative estimate, or is there something forecasted specific that led you to that?
It's two things. One, it's conservative. It's 2 years of conservatism, so it is a bit compounded. But the real difference is once you take that $3.2 million in non-recurring revenue in 2020, we don't sell land in 2021. So it takes our operating revenues down $3.2 million just to start the comparison. And then you do make some of that up, but obviously not all of it.
Very good. Thank you.
Anything else? Jane?
No, I actually like the charts showing actuals versus budgeted. It can give you an idea of whether or not we're sticking pretty close to the line. One of the things that I noticed was in the line items of 71,3004, which was the other professional services, and 71,3005, which are contractual services. Those were our largest increases over the last 3 years, if you watch those over a 3-year trend. Obviously, we're adding amenities, we're growing as a city, but they become a line item that obviously is growing faster in percentage-wise, because I think our staff has done a great job. As you look through all the other line items in their departments, they've held them pretty close other than personnel services, but those contractual services are an indicator of the kinds of needs that we're growing in. And I think it would be an interesting study to kind of look to see over the period what those contractual services are, so we can see what our needs have been shifting to over that period of time. So I think that would be an interesting exercise, certainly not for now, but it's just one of those flags that come up and say that one's grown pretty quickly.
Sure. One of the challenges with this kind of short time horizon, only having 3 years, it's hard to predict a trend. But one of the things we have seen over the last 3 years is a shift in IT from capital infrastructure purchases to more of a contractual type relationship. And that's part of the reason for some of that increase is we're not buying servers, we're buying hosted services. So it's moving capital infrastructure purchases to the operating budget. And we're going to continue to see that moving forward. It's likely to accelerate more than it is slow down. So we'll continue to look at that and continue to share that information with you.
Yeah, I think understanding the categories of where those contractual services lies helps us to understand, one, if we're meeting the priorities that we've set for ourselves, like in certain areas that we've designated we want to spend those extra dollars. And if that occurs in contractual services, kind of gives us a reassurance that that's where the money's being used. Sure. Thank you.
Great. Anything else? Michael, anything? Christina? Yeah, it is extremely difficult, Matt, to get things to look simple. And I really appreciate your persistence with these diagrams and things, because it really does encapsulate, I think, what Kathy's been getting at for all these conversations. So thank you very much for your stick-to-itiveness on that. Hearing no other questions, Ann?
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Thanks, Matt. Ordinance 65-19.
Amending various sections of Ordinance 1517.
Homer.
Good evening, Council. There are no changes since the first reading on November 4th. I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Any
and we
questions from
recommend
council?
approval.
Hearing none. Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ordinance 66-19.
Authorizing provision of certain incentives to Renaissance Tech LLC to induce it to purchase a facility to retain and expand its corporate headquarters and its associated operations and workforce, all within the city. Authorizing execution of an economic development agreement.
Sarah, welcome.
Good evening. There's no new additional information since the first reading. I do have members Jeremy Finley and Benjamin Karam from Renaissance Tech with us tonight that would like to come up and share their story.
Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
An address for you.
Thank you. Address 5880 Venture Drive. My name is Ben Karam. This is my business partner, Jeremy Finley. We are the founders of Renaissance Tech. Renaissance Tech is an enterprise software company. We have clients all over the U.S., Canada, just now in the U.K. One of our local customers in Dublin is Sutphen Fire Truck. We've built up a really amazing, talented, diverse team, and most of which work in our Dublin office on Venture Drive. If you check out the Chamber's video on the Dublin Battle of the Businesses this last year, you'll see clips of our team participating in that. More importantly, you'll see some highlights of us getting second place in the kickball tournament. We'll be back next year.
Good first place.
We started this business 6.5 years ago in each other's spare bedrooms. At the time, I was living in Galion, Ohio with my family, and Jeremy in Lewis Center. Early on, we realized we needed some space in which to hire people and grow, and we came across the Dublin Entrepreneurial Center, which for us had a great blend of features, modern office, kind of a feel to it. It was very affordable, very economical for us to start there. We started with a desk and then an office and then 2 offices. And it also had an entrepreneurial spirit and community there, and it was good to work with a lot of other small businesses and just kind of engage with their energy as well. It also gave us some familiarity in working there over a couple of years with just the city of Dublin in general. And so as we grew and graduated out of the deck, we took the opportunity to lease an office in historic Dublin, which was a beautiful and charming experience for all of us. We spent 18 months, about a year and a half, downtown, just enjoying that experience. We continued to grow, and we purchased our current building on Perimeter and Venture. We renovated that and have pretty much filled that space to capacity, and now we're looking to continue to grow and to grow within Dublin. Really, the last 6 years have been pretty transformative for both of us. We've moved our families and our lives to Dublin, and now are looking to continue to grow our business here. I want to thank really everyone that we've kind of met and worked with along the way, with the City of Dublin, the Econ Dev Office, Historic Dublin, the Chamber. Just everyone's been very responsive, proactive. Again, there's kind of a positive can-do energy that exists within this city that's good for us. I think initially, when we came to Dublin, it was more look for just a good place to get started. We weren't really analyzing it at any more depth than that. We got started at the deck, but we've gotten to know what Dublin really has to offer. And as we look to grow, we're looking at infrastructure and talent and people and energy and these things. So Anyway.
It's fantastic. You guys are like a poster child for that. I mean,
Yeah.
everything that's good about the deck and guys like you that are just taking an idea and making a career out of it. And now, am I to understand both of you live in Dublin as well? That the ball is out of the park. You have now hit the cover off the ball. So, that's absolutely fantastic. What do you go to work in the morning, and what do you do exactly?
That's what I was going to ask you. I read the synopsis, but I wanted to.
So, in 30 seconds or less, what do you do when you get to work?
Well, yeah, it's a myriad of pretty much everything now that we're growing. We're wearing a lot of hats. We work with product configuration systems, those software applications where you configure product the way you want to buy it. We work with a lot of window and door companies. Again, Sutton Fire Truck is a good example of a complex product that the software we work with tries to make simple to order.
Wow, fantastic.
I'll sum it up for you.
Sure.
My wife's always like, hey, what do you do for a living? She tells them computer stuff. So that's all you need to know.
Okay. That's all we need to know.
So I'll ask a question. So I saw when I went out looked that Infor, the product that you, so is this the Sightline product or the beginning of that? Because I spent some time at Cymex years ago. So I'm wondering, is that the genesis of that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I know what they do. That's fantastic. You know, at the time that when the organization decided to go into the configuration end of that business, that was the really scary stuff. But it turned out that it was probably some of the most valuable stuff, right? The configuration of this. Is AI changing all of that, or?
It could.
Maybe.
Yeah, they're starting to play around with some of that. I mean, all the new technology, from AI to 3D to 2D to just your basic online ordering. I mean, it's game-changing for a lot of those companies, too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. And it's great to see the evolution of some of that work, so that's wonderful. Congratulations, that's great.
And when it comes to the relationship with the city, I tell these new companies all the time, it's not a date, it's a marriage. We'll be here throughout your continued expansion, so don't forget, I mean, you're part of who we are, and you're sort of the best part. That's exactly what we're looking for.
Sort of like a little of the Elon Musk story. I mean, I'm really
Elon
impressed.
Musk.
These two guys. God,
So
way to go.
thank you for coming in. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Ann?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
First reading ordinance is ordinance 67-19.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a real estate transfer and development agreement and an infrastructure agreement for the development of the Corners development in the city and for the construction of certain related infrastructure and park improvements, authorizing execution of various related agreements and documents.
I will introduce it. Donna?
Good evening, members of council. At your last meeting, we introduced a project that we call the Corners, which is located along France Road between Rings Road and Blazer Parkway. And we introduced 4 pieces of legislation for your consideration to move this project forward. So based upon the feedback that we received, this evening we will be presenting the real estate transfer and development agreement and the infrastructure agreement, which outlines the basic business terms of the agreement. So should council decide to move forward with a second reading of this ordinance, we will proceed with the council agenda as written tonight and bring forward the 3 additional ordinances for the TIF modification and creation, as well as the rezoning request. Pending council's favorable review, staff proposes to bring all 4 ordinances forward for second reading, as well as a resolution to accept the preliminary plat on December 2nd. If, however, we do not receive favorable response from council on the terms of the agreement tonight, we will not be presenting the 3 other items that are associated with the project at this time. With that, I'd like to remind you what the project site looks like. You'll recall that sub-area A, which is in yellow, is the public park area, and that is approximately 4 acres with pedestrian bicycle connections to and through the site. Sub-area B1, which is in pink, is the commercial development area, and that's approximately 6.5 acres, and that will include approximately 47,000 square feet of restaurant and retail space. Sub-areas B2 and B3 are shown in green and purple, and each of those sites is approximately 1.5 acres, and those will be built to suit office pad sites and can hold approximately 12,000 square feet each. The total private improvements are estimated at $15.4 million, and the total project cost to the city for the park and the required public improvements, including the developer financing structure, is $3,895,000. So tonight, we are seeking your authorization to move forward with the business terms as described and articulated in the two separate agreements in your packet. The first one is the real estate transfer and development agreement, and the second would be the infrastructure agreement. In regard to the real estate transfer and development agreement, as outlined in your memo and supporting documents, the Daimler Group, in exchange for the transfer of subareas B1, B2, and B3, agrees to design, construct, finance a portion of, and install public improvements, as well as maintain the public gateway at the corner of the site. It's important to note that ownership of the land will not be transferred until Council's approval of the final development plan, the property transfer and development agreement, and the infrastructure agreement. So once Daimler holds ownership of the property, should they desire to transfer any piece or portion of B1, B2, or B3 to an entity other than an affiliated holding group or LLC of the Daimler Group prior to 20 years from the date of transfer from the city, they will be required to reimburse the city for costs incurred for the land and associated legal expenses on a per acre basis. And that's been calculated at $84,406 per acre. Additionally, prior to the city's transfer of ownership, Daimler must obtain approval of an amended final development plan and obtain a lot split for a project on that site, which would be subject to approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Further, should subarea B1 remain undeveloped for a period of 3 years, or should subareas B2 and B3 remain undeveloped for a period of 5 years from the date of transfer, the city shall have the option to purchase back each of the subareas for a cost of $100 plus the documented out-of-pocket costs that were specifically incurred for that subarea. If there are no questions on this portion of the real estate transfer and development agreement, I can move forward with the infrastructure agreement.
Any questions at this point?
Is there expectations on the remains of the undeveloped period? Have we set any parameters? Is it structural? Is it cost of structure? Is it?
I'm not certain I understand your question, Councilmember.
Should subarea B1 remain undeveloped for a period of 3 years from the date of transfer, the city will have the option to purchase the property. But what is the development standards, I guess?
So what does develop really mean? What does it mean to
right.
be substantially developed? So for area B1, what we're looking for is that the area of square footage that I mentioned, 47,000 square feet, is what we anticipate to be built out in B1. So if we see that kind of development there and that momentum occurring, we will feel that they have satisfied their terms under the agreement. B2 and B3, which are the office pads, again, they have a little bit longer to move forward with those. But there is some infrastructure that obviously they will want to put into the site. It would behoove them from an economic standpoint to do that simultaneously. So as they market those pads, those office pads, certainly there would be some costs incurred there. So if we see that development, that trajectory, some interest that's happening in the property, we would feel that they have satisfied their agreement.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions on these provisions?
Just on the one about the agreement part about the parks, it in the development or in the agreement, in the infrastructure agreement, it talks about the city's obligation to finish out the park, and it describes different elements of it. I am assuming that that's a preliminary sort of agreement that we have about what will go into the parks, or how permanent is that sort of a?
Yeah, so
design.
That's based on an estimate that we have put together working with the civil engineers and the engineers that are working with the developer. So we've come up with that kind of budgeted number, which we've built into the TIF arrangement and financial structure, and Matt can talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of the details of the development for the park, what all of those actual, nitty-gritty things are, those have not been determined yet. So we've just got that ballpark number to work with.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions on this part? I guess
All right, so with that, I'll move forward to the infrastructure agreement. And this document addresses the terms by which the developer will proceed and complete construction of the public improvements. It also outlines the financing structure of the developer's portion of those public improvements. So the first item for council's consideration is detailed in section 5 of the agreement, and that is to agree that the developer will serve as the general contractor for those public improvements, with the expectation that they will be completed in a manner that is consistent and applicable with city requirements and development regulations, and those should be completed no later than December 31st, 2021. If, however, the developer does not meet that deadline, they will be given a 30-day notice to cure any default. And alternatively, the city and/or the developer may also pursue options that are outlined in section 7.1 of the agreement to remedy that non-performance or compliance. The second consideration for council necessary to execute the project is the establishment of a project fund. As outlined in section 6 of the agreement, the city would cash fund the first $1.6 million of cost, and Daimler would provide upfront funding for the balance of $1.765 million. The developer has conceptually agreed to carry the remaining costs up to $2 million, with annual reimbursement payments of approximately $230,000 to be made by the city over a 10-year period through the TIF agreement. The expectation is that Daimler will begin to build out the site with subarea B1 along France Road to include that supporting infrastructure in year 2020, with approximately $3 million of property improvements in 2021, $4 million in year 2022, and $3.4 million in 2023 to total the $10.4 million minimum project value. Thus, the city would be receiving property taxes on the full valuation of the improvements beginning in 2024. So we've taken a conservative approach when calculating the TIF, as the build-out of the office pads has not been figured into that financial scenario. As I mentioned initially, the project cost is expected to be $15.4 million. We've taken that $5 million out and based our TIF structure on that $10.4 million valuation only. So all of those calculations will not have any impact on the 2024 CIP, as this project doesn't utilize any of the income tax revenue, and the project is fully funded through the TIF dollars that are not currently programmed for any other specific purpose in the CIP. So if council agrees to the key conditions as described in the infrastructure agreement, we will proceed with the legislation this evening to address the modification to and the creation of the TIF to support the project's development. So pending council's approval of this ordinance, staff will continue with the agenda as published and present the following related legislation that includes an ordinance to modify the existing TIF, an ordinance to create the new Rings France TIF, and an ordinance to rezone the parcel. So pending council's approval of all four of those ordinances, staff proposes to bring them forward for second reading, as well as a resolution to accept the preliminary plat at the December 2nd council meeting. And with that, welcome council's questions on the business terms of the agreement.
Any questions on the agreement? Kathy?
I had a couple, thank you. So the $1.6 million for the investment in the first phase of the park, is that intended to be cash funded, general fund funded, or?
Yeah, let me.
Matt's saying no. Okay.
I'll turn that one over to Matt, and he'll
Thank you.
get specific.
Sure, that $1.6 million is from the fund balance of the Rings France TIF.
Okay, great. And then the second question is the timing of the city's work on that park, or again, it would be the developers, because that's the way it works. What would be the timing of the park versus the timing of the rest of the development?
Oh, all of that is expected to occur concurrently.
So the work on the park would not begin unless and until
there was development on the subarea B1, which fronts the France Road piece.
So back to the earlier questions about timing, the park would begin when we begin to see some other development happen on there, but not before that.
No, and two, as I mentioned, there's a timeline that's tied to the development of subarea B1, which is 2021. So we would expect to see that work start to happen immediately.
Thank you.
Anything else? Jane?
I had a couple questions about it. The memo addresses prevailing wage for the construction of the park. Is there any interest? Oftentimes private entities will construct park areas and dedicate it back to the city. Being that this is a fee, do we have any options with that? Because that's surely going to drive up the costs of that parkland development.
No, we've not built that into the agreement. Prevailing wages is stipulated as part of the terms of the agreement. I can turn that over to legal
Since
as
it's
well.
construction of a park, we would have to follow prevailing wage no matter what.
Right.
Even if they were to retain any portion of ownership.
Jane?
I think one thing for the public to understand is that by creating this new TIF, this is a non-school TIF, so the schools are fully made whole by that. So I think that's an important point to make here. And then and I believe it's in the changing it to a PUD, and I don't know if have you gotten quite to that, is that the next thing you're talking about?
Yeah, that will be presented as part of the rezoning.
Okay, so I just have a question about that, past that, so that's all. I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, so nobody has any problems, although we're going to have a second hearing, nobody has any problems at this point with this agreement in this ordinance. Okay, then we will go on to ordinance 68-19.
Amending ordinance number 8300, Rings, France. TIF passed June 19, 2000, as subsequently amended to supplement the public improvements to be made to benefit the property and identified in that ordinance.
I will introduce it. Matt?
Good evening, Council. Ordinance 68-19 modifies the existing Rings France TIF in order to fund the public improvements outlined in the development agreement with the Daimler Group. The TIF was established by Ordinance 83-00 in 2000 and has not been previously modified. The modifications in Ordinance 68-19 would allow for the public improvements outlined in the development agreement and funded from a transfer from this TIF. These modifications include those listed on the slide there. The total for this TIF will transfer just over $3 million over the next 8 years to the new TIF in order to pay for the public improvements outlined in the development agreement. This will include the $1.6 million transfer in year 1 and then an additional $1.45 million in total over the next 7 years. The funding provided by this TIF is outlined in the 5th column on this slide, and the chart detailing the project's cost and funding stream is provided by this slide. As noted, total transfers from this TIF will be just over $3 million. And this slide provides some additional information on the cost regarding the public improvements associated with the development agreement that will be undertaken as part of the TIF modification. Staff is recommending approval at the second hearing on December 2nd.
Any questions from council?
Matt, can you back up to your second slide? So some of the improvements we intend to do on this parcel were not permitted by the original TIF.
Correct.
So we are adding those capabilities to the original TIF. In the next ordinance that we hear will be developing a new TIF on this property. So is part of the modification of this TIF then removing that parcel? Can a property be under 2 different TIFs simultaneously?
No, a property can't be. The next ordinance that creates the new TIF will actually remove the project area from the parcel on a parcel-by-parcel basis as there are public improvements on that parcel.
Okay.
Similar to how we did H2 Hotel and Cooker, very identical kind of fashion. The reason that we have to modify this TIF at all is because of its age. In 2000, when we drafted the public improvements for TIF, we were extremely prescriptive and rigid. If this TIF would have been 2010 or later, we probably wouldn't need to modify it. But for example, the current TIF language doesn't contemplate a public park at all. That's a significant component of this development agreement, so we need to include that language in this new modified TIF.
So the next ordinance that removes this from this TIF and creates it in a new one, we are precluded from spending these monies in a new TIF property?
No. This one's a little awkward because the parcel is actually in both TIFs.
Right.
It would work the same way if they were in close proximity to each other. It just happens to be, in this case, they are on the same project area.
My question really was related to if we remove it, if we approve these expenditures in this TIF and then we remove it, can we spend the money that we just allocated in something that has been removed?
Sure. We are allowed to transfer money between TIFs if a project has a public purpose for both TIFs. You'll see some of our construction projects that might run roadway projects that connects between two TIFs would be probably a better example than a more common example, not necessarily better, but more common for how multiple TIFs can fund the same project.
Very good, thank you.
By making this modification, we're making it clear that we intend for this TIF to be allowed to pay for the park. If we just removed it and didn't modify it, you might say, well, that wasn't a purpose for the money initially until you moved it. This makes clear what our intention is.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Jane?
Just, Matt, on this particular TIF, on the existing TIF, once this money is moved out, will that have taken all the money out of that TIF, or will that TIF has remaining dollars to be spent for amenities?
Correct. That TIF has a fund balance of about $4.7 million. The remainder of the funds are currently programmed in the 5-year CIP, so there won't be any additional funds, but the 1.6 that we're spending is not programmed in the current CIP, so there'll be no impact on it.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Okay, we'll see you back on December 2nd on that one. Ordinance 69-19.
Declaring the improvement to certain parcels of real property known as the Corners Development to be a public purpose and exempt from taxation, providing for the collection and deposit of service payments and specifying the purposes for which those service payments may be expended, specifying the public infrastructure improvements directly benefiting the parcels, authorizing compensation payments to the Dublin City School District and the Tolles Career and Technical Center, and repealing ordinance number 8300.
I will introduce it. Matt?
All right. Ordinance 69-19 creates a new TIF and repeals the existing Rings France TIF on the project site as development occurs and according to the development agreement with the Daimler Group. Private improvements estimated in this TIF, as Donna mentioned, are $15.4 million. The funding model is based on a $10.4 million valuation. That's what supports the public improvements, and that is what the minimum service payment is based upon. At that $10.4 million valuation, the TIF is expected to generate $3.5 million in revenues over its 30-year life. These TIF proceeds will be used to fund the public improvements previously discussed and identified as part of the development agreement.
Any oh, you started.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The funding provided by this TIF is outlined in the 6th column. And as noted, it will utilize just under $850,000 in service payment revenue over its first 10 years. Over the final 20 years, the TIF will generate approximately $130,000 a year and end with a fund balance of about $2.6 million. We recommend approval at the second hearing.
Any questions from council? Okay, moving right along to ordinance 70-19.
Rezoning approximately 13.5 acres more or less located west of France Road, north of Rings Road, and south of Paul Blazer Parkway from OLR Office Laboratory and Research District to PUD Planned Unit Development District, the Corners, for the future development of up to 70,000 square feet for commercial and office uses and a public park.
I will introduce it. Claudia.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. So this before you is the rezoning ordinance, where we are in our second step as outlined in the zoning code to go from a standard district site, which is currently zoned OLR, to a planned unit development district with a preliminary development plan that you would be approving with this ordinance, as well as the development text which accompanies and goes hand in hand with the plan. So you have the rules in the text and the visuals in the plan. Again, real quickly, we've talked about this at the last meeting and tonight. The site is just north of Rings and west of France. And it includes the stormwater management ponds that the city installed for Cardinal Health there. Like we discussed, it is currently zoned OLR, so it's a standard district that was created in the 70s or even before then, and would not currently permit that mixed-use environment that is desired here for this site and across the DCAP area plan. Within the DCAP area plan, however, it does lay out future land uses which would speak to those types of uses that are envisioned here. And as we've been discussing over the last few months, that the zoning code just hasn't caught up to those future land uses, and therefore the PUD is the appropriate mechanism to get the zoning into place. So with that, is a little bit more detail here for the preliminary development plan. And like Donna had mentioned already, there are proposed uses, mix of office, commercial, retail, and then the park there in the center. Development is capped at approximately 70,000 square feet. And then included in the preliminary development plan are some architectural images that have been vetted through public meetings with the neighborhood as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission, and there was definitely that desire for having a more rural architectural feel, especially for the retail pieces that are out on France, to also coordinate somewhat and relate to the field of corn, which is south of Rings. And then some images referencing developments that Daimler has done in town of similar sizes and similar uses. And then also included reference images for what the park could look like in the future, what kind of amenities and improvements could take place there. And that gets a little bit to Ms. Fox's question about the details of the park. So those would be part of the final development plan, which the Planning and Zoning Commission would see and would obviously have a lot of staff input and parks input, landscape architect with parks as well being part of that review team. So with that, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval to City Council on September the 19th with 6 conditions, 5 of which have been addressed as part of the package that is before you. The 6th one deals with parking. There was some conversation at Planning Commission regarding shared parking and how that would lay out and what types of different uses would have types of different needs. And since we don't know those yet, as to which building are they going to be in and which parking lots are they going to take, that information would be something that we can provide at the final development plan stage to the Commission. So with that, we are also recommending approval of this ordinance at the December 2nd second reading.
Thank you, Claudia. Any
Thank
questions
you.
from council? Jane?
I do. All of these things that planning and zoning were very beneficial, especially adding the commercial, the neighborhood commercial, because it allowed some uses that originally were in the development text that didn't provide for that. But there's one item in the development text speaking to architecture in subareas B2 and B3, and that says it's intended to provide, the architecture in those areas intended to provide a transition between the rural agriculturally influenced architecture of subarea B1 and existing contemporary architecture of office developments to the west, meaning that the architecture would be different in the front of the partial from the back of the partial. They were asking for a transitional contemporary. And so what I would like to discuss is, I believe it's 10 acres. The partial needs cohesiveness in architectural style. So I would like to see that, that change so that the subareas B2 and 3 would have similar architectural style and not change from the front to the back of the partial. I just think, especially with the Central Park, it's going to look a little bit disconnected. And I think it was just something that was recommended early on when we were talking about developing Metro Blazer in this sort of contemporary style, but there are really no adjacent contemporary buildings near this partial. So it wouldn't really be speaking to any other architecture to look at it other than the Cardinal building, which is quite a ways distance. I think cohesively, in an aesthetic, the entire partial should have similar architecture. So that's just...
Where did you find that? Where's that?
It's in the development text, and I think if we pass this, then this is sort of the recommended. Now, I suppose in planning and zoning, one could go back and change this, but I'm not sure.
Well, You're correct. There is absolutely that desire to provide some type of a transition from whatever that walkable, more rural farm look is that is envisioned for that France Road frontage, with that potentially not being what the developer was envisioning for the office parcel, mainly because it is more of a flatter, single-story kind of an architectural theme. And obviously, the seven-story building is very boxy and modern. So what the text does say, though, it has an intent in there about creating contemporary architecture for the developments to the west, but it also says that there is as otherwise approved as a planning and zoning commission. So in terms of materials, in terms of colors, all of those things are written out, but the planning commission would ultimately be the ones that would, hopefully with the user in mind as well.
I could see how the farm architecture could be difficult for an office design, but maybe instead of putting contemporary, maybe we change that word to complementary architecture.
I think that's what I'm looking at. When you say contemporary, I think because of the way that we had originally designed the Metro Blazer area, we were looking for more urban contemporary architecture. I'm looking for complementary. I think that there are many ways.
Some contemporaries can be complementary, like I'm thinking of the rail that's just a little bit further down.
Right.
Could be a complementary kind of architecture to what is what is envisioned here in those illustrations. So maybe if we just changed contemporary to complementary.
And I just wanted to point out that the paragraph says the existing contemporary architecture. It doesn't say contemporary architecture is required for new buildings.
Right, but I think what we want is the intent of the balance of this site to be complementary to the new
Absolutely,
construction. Not necessarily in reference to the Cardinal building. We would prefer to, instead of complement the Cardinal building, we would prefer to complement the frontage of France Road.
Gotcha. So we can bring some revised language back for that second reading.
That'd be wonderful.
I think that's really the better, because I want to be sure that the intent there was not to create two different types of architecture on a small parcel around a central park.
Because then you're going to have three in a row, because it's not going to look like the Cardinal building, and it's not going to look like the front, and then, so,
Yeah, we'll propose something for your second reading.
Thank you.
Anything else, Jane?
Just one other comment about an architecture, and I know that we'll be addressing this at planning and zoning, but without going through, a majority of this, the document allows for quite a bit of flexibility when it comes to window fenestrations and that sort of thing. We're not creating a form-based code kind of regiment about what they will be able to do. Creativity and flexibility are built into this development text, I'm hoping.
Yes, so there is no number crunching of percentages like you're used to in the more form-based codes.
Okay, all right. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Is that it? Any other questions from council? All right, we'll see you back on December 2nd on that one as well. Thank you, Claudia. Resolutions, ordinance 71-19.
Establishing appropriations based on the 2020 operating budget of the City of Dublin, State of Ohio for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2020.
I will introduce it. Matt.
Ordinance 71-19 contains the appropriations for the operating budget we just adopted earlier this evening, and we're requesting approval at the December 2nd hearing.
Questions from council? Hearing none. We'll see you back on December 2nd. Ordinance 72-19.
Amending the annual appropriations for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2019.
I will introduce it. Matt?
This ordinance contains amendments to the annual appropriations, and I'm available for questions.
Any questions from council?
Yeah, I had a couple. I'll start with sort of the resulting chart that you had at the end of the memo, Matt, that you gave us that addresses the current fund balance as of, I guess, November the 4th. And then with this supplemental $15 million addition and the remaining encumbrances, et cetera, so forth, That puts the ending cash balance around 43.8 million. Is that, close does that get us to what our required?
Because this is an advance, it's accepted out of the debt service policy because we're going to backfill that 15 million with bond proceeds probably between February and April of next year. So that 43 million isn't the number that will be referenced when we reference our general fund balance. It'll be the 43 plus the 15.
So that, of that appropriation, the 15 million, what would we say, 14 million of that is going to be?
The 15.5 is going to be bond proceeds. 14 million for the park and 1.5 for the sewer will be repaid to the general fund for this advance when we sell the bonds in the first quarter of next year.
So what is the anticipated total value of that bond offering in 2020? Do you have that number?
I don't have that right now. That's a discussion I need to have starting next month, but it'll be at least 15.5 and 6 million for the pool, and then I'll have to have some conversations to see what other projects may have been budgeted for debt proceeds, particularly sewer projects in 19 that are going to be constructed in 2020. So it'll be in that area.
The debt fund policy, or I'm sorry, the general fund balance policy, what number do you use for that? Is that our projected or actual numbers?
Sure, it is the actual number from the previous year. No, sorry. It is the budgeted number from the current year plus all supplementals approved throughout the year for January through November. And then in December, it becomes the actual number. That's the number that's reported in all the budget slides. We use the actual as soon as we have it.
So what is that number?
I'd have to go back. It's been a while since I looked at 2019.
Do we need the entire, I guess my question
do.
is, we need the entire 15.5 to
We do.
meet our,
It's not the first time that our debt has gone below the 50% threshold in order to advance fund bond debt service projects. This will be the second time we've done that.
You mean our reserve?
I'm sorry, our reserve, yeah.
And the thinking behind excluding the debt funding is that it would be debt funding within a year's period of time? Or, I mean, is there a time window on that policy? Or, I mean, council could say, we're not real interested in doing a debt issuance because of capital markets in 2019.
yes, it's kind of a commitment to the sale of debt, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it is, and that's why I was interested in that.
I'll have to read through the policy in a bit more detail on the particulars related to that, but I'll get back with you.
Yeah, that might be interesting to look at that time window there, only because we're now touching it or below. What is that, given our current operating, what would be that floor?
That's the number he's going to check on, I think.
For 2020, once we get to January, it'll become the budgeted expenditures, which were budgeted operating expenditures.
97?
95, 9?
96?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we report back around.
Yeah, I'll look at that policy in more detail and write you a very detailed memo on what fund balance we use and when we switch.
Because I think those are going to be really important as we approach the sale of debt and making sure that we aren't buying more than we need.
Anything else, Scott?
I did. I had a couple just sort of other type general questions. We're 45 days from the end of 19 and into 20, and several of these items, I'm just curious why we are doing some of these in 19 and not included some of them in the 2020 plan.
Okay. Can you point to one specific? I'm sorry.
Maybe the last one on the list, the COIRS.
Because that is an agency fund, and the Corps Board voted in 19 to purchase the shelter building in this calendar year. So we are just an agency fund for them.
So that was out of our control. And the water and the sewer funds, we will actually do that work this year or begin that. Again, I was just, the size of this appropriation change, I was just wondering why some of it was in.
Sure. So the water and sewer requested in Section 9 are actually refunds for overpayments, and the developer that overpaid that is interested in getting their money as soon as possible. So that's why we're trying to accommodate that request.
And avoid interest.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And yeah, okay.
Anything else? No. Any other questions? All right, we'll see you back on December 2nd. Thanks, man. Resolutions. Resolution 61-19.
Appointing members to the Historic Dublin Vision Task Force.
I make a motion that we postpone the introduction of this legislation until the December 2nd council meeting. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Saludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms.
Yes.
Resolution 62-19.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with and execute a guaranteed maximum price amendment with Russelli Construction Company, Inc., construction manager at risk for the Dublin 5555 Perimeter Drive renovation construction project.
I will introduce it. Megan.
Good evening, members of council. As council is aware, the renovation and construction process for the new city hall is designed to deliver the administrative offices in the existing 5555 Perimeter Drive building and the new city hall council chambers addition in phases. We have previously provided council with status updates, and that information has been included in your packet for this evening. Following a competitive selection process, Russelli Construction Company was selected to serve as the construction manager at risk for this project. Russelli is working closely with the design team and city staff throughout the design development process. We've been focusing our efforts on designing the renovations that are needed for existing City Hall staff to relocate, as well as human resources staff who will be relocating from the service center. This initial construction phase includes items such as selective interior demolition, flooring, LED light fixtures, and lighting controls, HVAC equipment, and fire protection system upgrades. Russelli completed its competitive bidding process for these items in late October, and council's approval of this resolution will allow for construction to begin in early December, which is part of the reason why we're phasing these things. This resolution establishes the first guaranteed maximum price contract in the amount of $329,854. An amendment to the GMP for the balance of the renovation work, as well as long lead time item purchases for the council chambers addition, will be presented to council at your meeting in December. City staff will begin occupying the new City Hall administrative building in April of 2020. And a third amendment to the GMP will encompass the majority of the council chambers addition work, and that's planned to be presented to City Council for approval in May of 2020. We have thoroughly reviewed the pricing, and we recommend approval of this resolution. And thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Thank you, Megan. Resolution 63-19, Ann?
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with Frost Brown Todd LLC for the provision of legal services.
I will introduce it. Dana?
Good evening, members of council. I'm pleased to recommend council pass Resolution 6319 for legal services for the city of Dublin. As council is aware, per the revised charter, Dublin, Ohio, Article 6.03b, the director of law shall be appointed by the city manager subject to the approval of city council. I've determined the many years of past service of our law director and her team of attorneys to be no less than outstanding, and I recommend the continued service of our current law director and the provision of legal services by Frost Brown Todd LLC via the agreement provided in your packet and referenced by Resolution 6319. Jennifer and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Resolution 64-19.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with United Steelworkers of America regarding wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment for employees within the maintenance worker, fleet technician 1, electrical worker, and custodial worker bargaining unit.
I will introduce it. Homer?
Okay. The collective bargaining agreement that has been negotiated between the city and the United Steelworkers is a 3-year agreement that calls for a reopener in 2 specific areas in a year. Those would be wages and health benefits. In terms of wages, wages for all workers covered by this agreement for the first year of this 3-year agreement is 2% effective the 1st of January 2020, and subsequent increases for 2021 and 22 are to be determined. Both parties agree to leave the health insurance benefits status quo during the first year of the contract in order to facilitate further research and analysis of the health insurance program as it pertains to rising costs. I would like to thank the members of the bargaining teams for both sides, the USW and management. As difficult as labor negotiations can be, both sides were very professional and very focused on developing an agreement that works for both sides. Subject to your questions, staff recommends approval of the resolution.
Any questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Mr. Keenan? Yes. Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
And Mayor Peterson?
Yes. Resolution 65-19.
Requesting the Delaware, Franklin, and Union County auditors to draw money that may be in the county treasuries and to issue a draft to the Director of Finance for the City of Dublin for any money that may be in the accounts for the City of Dublin.
I will introduce it. Matt?
This is a routine housekeeping resolution to receive the property tax revenue that's currently being held by the Franklin County Auditor about 3 months early so that we can begin to invest that revenue and earn interest on it during that time period.
Any questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
And Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Matthew, you've earned your money tonight.
You sure did. We should get him a stool with his name on it over there. Resolution 66.
That'll do.
Appointment of a member to an unexpired term on the Community Services Advisory Commission.
I will introduce it. Chris? You're up.
You're up.
Okay. We have,
It's in the script.
give me just a second. I gotta open up that. Okay, we have filled a vacancy. We did a number of things. We held our interviews a couple weeks ago. We did select, we had a resignation from Stephanie Hall that needed to be filled. We have filled that position with Alice Kananchoff. And we also filled future expiring terms. Those folks will be named at a later date. So we did have a wonderful pool of applicants come. And I tell you, I think we were so moved by what great folks we had applying for CSAC. We determined that, you know, it might be better in the future to have that board be slightly larger than it's been in the past so that we can accommodate some of the great ideas we heard during the interview process. So congratulations to Alice. We look forward to working with her. And Jenny has reached out to her and started all the necessary paperwork. So she will be up and running very shortly.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
And Mr. Keenan?
Under the other portion of our agenda, Riverside Crossing Park Master Sign Plan. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, members of council. As you mentioned, this is a master sign plan for the Riverside Crossing Park. And as you recall, council approved the site plan for this project back in December of last year. So I've outlined the site here just for context purposes. The green area in the center there is really the part that we're focused on related to the master sign plan request. So as council will also recall, during the construction of the park, there'll be a temporary pathway as the bridge will be open and we'll be wanting to provide access from both sides of the river in a safe manner. And in order to do that, obviously there'll be construction fence located on either side of that. And at council's request, to include temporary fence graphics as part of that to help showcase what the park is going to look like, as well as help promote the city and all the wonderful things that we are doing, as well as you'll see here in the graphics an opportunity to sort of peek into the fence and see what's going on behind the fence. So with that, the fence will be located as you can see, sort of in this curvilinear pattern here, and the red line on either side of that will be where these temporary graphics will be located.
Cool.
So this is sort of hard to see in scale, but in your packet, you'll see that. So it has images of the various views of the park as were approved with the site plan, with then information about the park opening, and then the green graphics in between have a lot of city statistics that talk about our intelligent communities, best suburb in Ohio, those types of things, so helping to promote that. And then you'll see here in the far right side, it looks like a little gray box. That's where these sort of mesh it looks almost like a soccer goal is what I was thinking of when you look through it. So you can see into the park. And here's some more zoomed in graphics. So you can sort of see through on this side here on the image on the right what that can look like. So you can look in there and see what that looks like. So the graphics will be a mesh fabric and be installed, again, in panels to then cover that entire construction fence leading into the park as well as then along Riverside Drive. So with that, staff is recommending approval with no conditions for this master sign plan, and I'm happy to answer any
Jenny,
questions.
do you have any information on when this will be installed?
My understanding is it will be within the park within the next month or so, and then on Riverside Drive, probably not till after the snow season is over, just to help preserve those.
Because I know the
graphics.
winter months are really hard on these
Right.
kinds of fencing, so.
Right, trying
it
to
would,
limit that.
You know, it would be nice to coordinate the installation for when pedestrians are mostly expected to be back in the area. And
Right.
I don't know if we have to get any of it up before, you know, kind of springtime. It would be nice if it looked all nice and fresh
Together.
when we were going to have pedestrian activity in the area. But that's just my opinion.
Any idea how long it'll be up?
Until, I think it's, 8 to 10 months. I was thinking it wasn't more than a year.
And you
so
think it'll wear okay?
That's our understanding, yes, as well.
We can always replace it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ready.
No, I think it's a great idea, and I think you guys did a good job with this idea, and I think it's going to add a lot of positive comments about the upcoming park.
Did you think about putting pictures of all council members along the way?
Outgoing especially. Yeah.
Oh, we thought
We're
about it.
throwing in the river.
Target practice,
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I make a motion, we approve the master sign plan.
Applauded.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yes.
Mr. Bossa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
And Mr. Keenan?
I'm not even sure where to go with this bullet point, field trip options. I don't know what to do with that other than skip it.
No, that is an ongoing discussion that has come out of your council goals, part of the retreat. And we did do a tour around this time last year with a few members of council and a few members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and stayed local. So we did Westerville, we did New Albany, we met with some of their staff there, and then visited Grandview Yard, did some explorations in Frankenton where there is some more modern urban infill. But wanted to see what you're all thinking in terms of planning this for next year. I mean, in the past you've traveled, which will take, a little bit more coordination. You are hoping to get together with Planning Commission and ARB more often, so that might be also something that we could discuss with them. But need some guidance ultimately in terms of who all should be there and where do you guys want to go?
I personally
what do you wanna
believe
see?
Jane Fox is the perfect person to come up with this list. 'Cause she's on P&Z, she's, does all this stuff. I think Jane should go up.
Jane, I think you should take a picture of our bridge and go back to Greenville and go,
Yeah. Well, we were deep in the weeds with our consultants, and we had asked them where we could see these kind of finished structures, groups, buildings, whatever, and they said they were going to get back with us because they kept saying, here, you guys are on the right track. They did say that we were the model for, even though they had 80 cities in their repertoire of consulting people, that they're now promoting Dublin from New York to San Diego to San Francisco as the model correct way to do this. But in parts of that discussion with them, if you recall, we said, well, where is the, and I forgot where we were in that tangent, but where is the other things, and can you come back? And they were supposed to come back with a list of things that would really help us advance the next step. So I don't know if they ever did. I never heard back from them. So I'd like to see what they thought.
You're talking about Don Elliott, the
Yeah, and
consultant that came?
Yeah. And they said, yeah, here's what you guys, probably need to go see, but they never gave us the names of what we needed to go see. So I think that would be an interesting field trip if we're going to have a field trip.
I also think it would be interesting as we think about entrepreneurial centers and the future of the deck and some of those. There's just been an enormous amount of innovation going on incubation of business and that type of thing. So I don't know how local we could do that. I'm not sure we have to, I don't know, but I would be particularly interested in opportunities. I very much liked the field trip that we did last time. It was very interesting to hear. I mean, you'll see it as you drive by that, but actually when we were able to engage with staff and talk to them about the good, the bad, and the challenging that they had, it was very useful. So I think as we think about the future of economic incubators and how that's working, I would vote for doing something like that.
I think that's on Director Gilger's homework list to pull together, so I don't know if she's still here.
She left, so we'll give it to her if it's not.
She went home to work on it, evidently, but yeah, I know that she was supposed to be working at that and maker spaces.
And we had similar discussions as well about some of the places that were the inspiration for the decap. That, again, it would require travel, but there are definitely case studies in the professional literature as well as inspirations that are some of these images that are in that plan.
In our leisure time, maybe we could make a list of some of the criteria, some of the things that we'd be interested in seeing. Like, it was great to go through the city to see what was going on in different parts, but we frequently use phrases like a variety of housing, placemaking, what is trendy with the millennials, and it might be interesting to have a little list of these little subtopic criteria, and then look for maybe nearby cities. Like a new word now is flexible zoning coming out of Cleveland. Maybe we could try to figure out if there are some cities that have some really amazing developments around some of the things that we're trying to, to improve on or increase here. We use the word placemaking, but it'd be nice to see examples of really great placemaking. Public art, some things that are really unusual that we might want to think about that we haven't had a chance to be exposed to and we might want to, bring forward to our cultural arts people. I don't know. I don't have the names of any places, but I certainly have a list of what I'd love to see. So.
I think I would also be really interested in finding some cities that have successfully integrated some different housing options that fit not only in with availability for, I'm thinking in particular about senior affordability, but as well as staying with sort of the look and the feel of the city that they're in terms of building standards and things of that nature. So I'd be really interested in taking a look at what might be out there in that realm.
That helps. Thank you.
Well, is that enough guidance for you there, Claudia?
It'll give us a great starting point, yes.
place to
And
start.
absolutely.
Okay.
If you think of anything else, just let us know and we'll make an inventory.
Okay, great. Thank you. Staff comments, Dana?
A few items I want to lift up that were in your packet, one of which I need some guidance from you on. The first, though, I do want to mention that we did make application for the state capital budget. You may have seen this in your packet. These get harder and harder to do. It seems like every time, and the advice we get is the criteria gets tougher. So after we scoured that guidance that we were hearing from different organizations, we narrowed it down to the log cabin that had been discovered under the house on Riverside Drive, and we had this had been donated to the city. We disassembled it, we stored it, and would like to reconstruct that over on Ferris Wright Park, and we've applied for state capital dollars to try to get funding to do that. So we'll see if we're successful or not, but just wanted to make you aware of that. One item I do need some guidance on is in regards to VIP club changes at the Dublin Irish Festival. Staff provided a memo regarding proposed changes to that. After a couple adjustments and lessons learned over the last couple of years, staff's recommending certain changes as referenced in the memo. Fundamentally, these changes are to lower the membership cost to the Emerald Club by $50. These paying guests and other non-paying guests of the Emerald Club would purchase alcoholic beverages separately. This will reduce confusion and ensure compliance with legal and auditor requirements. We certainly want those members and guests to enjoy their experience, so we would make purchasing as convenient as possible there. The sponsors will receive a certain amount of beverage tokens with their sponsorship package, and that approach is in compliance again with legal and auditor requirements. Staff's also proposing an increase in prices for all the other VIP clubs due to the overwhelming demand for them, and those changes are reflected in the memo. So I think the memo does a good job of breaking all that out and explaining it, and I'm seeking your concurrence with staff's recommended changes. But Matt, Alice, and I will do our best to answer any questions you might have on that.
I think that alcohol policy is consistent with what we did at the tournament with the,
Correct.
what do you call it, the villa. It's the responsible right thing.
So you're saying you could buy tokens at the Emerald Club?
Right, that's our intent.
But what about, so you'd have to go outside
Right.
to get a beer or whatever?
Correct.
And then back and forth?
Oh, there would
be-
not, would there
Well,
be?
I think, unless Allison's going to come up here and tell me different.
That's the way I read it.
She's
That's
running-
what she
she's
told me
running to
last.
the
She has a
microphone.
really good
I think there's
answer.
going to be alcohol in the.
She told me last we could do that.
We do still plan on having a bar in the Emerald Club. We're looking at some different options, but we want to have ability to actually purchase the tokens in there. The other thing that will change is instead of before you weren't allowed to take alcohol outside of Emerald Club, now you'll be able to take it in and out, and any tokens that you might buy in the Emerald Club you can use anywhere as well.
Good. So there were some of the other clubs, they were offering packages of 20 or 30 or whatever. I want to say $1,500 or $2,000. Is that 20 tickets for each day, or for, like the Dub Club, I guess would be a separate aside from the Emerald?
Yeah, and so it's one of those things, we have a couple different options. You can do the one that you get into
You get all three.
all three clubs. The Celtic Rock Club.
But those are each piece.
Yes.
And so you'd have to have 4 of them to be able to get 4 people each day in each club.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. The other ones are like packages, it looked like.
Yeah, because right now, for example, in the Celtic Rock Club, if you as an individual want to go to the Celtic Rock Club.
Excuse me, Allison, is your microphone on?
No, it's not. Sorry. To get into the Celtic Rock Club now, you either have to be with a group or you could buy that the VIP package that does all three, because we don't have individual seats in that Celtic Rock Club. It's the big clubs together, whereas the other clubs, you can buy individual ones.
So if you get the package of 20, is that just for one day? It costs that much for each day. So I'd have to pick 3 days' worth times whatever.
Correct, yes.
And is that a minimum 20, or can you get 10, or?
No, I mean, you would have to, well, the price is, and you get 20. So if you only bring 10, you're wasting your 10.
But you have to buy at least that, whatever the deal is the deal.
Correct.
I can't buy 4, I can't buy 10 individually.
No.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
You want a motion on that, Dane? Did anybody else have any other comments?
I would appreciate that.
I make a motion that we approve the policy outlined in the memo with respect to the Dublin Irish Festival.
I'll second.
Ann?
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr.
Yes.
Reiner?
Yes.
And Vice Mayor Ambrose Groves?
Also, there was a memo in your packet about the PED Bridge. There seems to be confusion out there about the cost of the bridge and are we in budget. Sometimes when you're running behind on a project, it makes it look like you're over budget. We wanted to assure you, and I appreciate Megan putting a memo together, and she's still shaking her head, yes, we're within budget. We are not within the original time frame that we had proposed, but we're getting close, but we just wanted to point that out. So all that information and the breakdown of the cost is there, and if you can carry that in your back pocket, as residents ask you about that, you can share that with them. Also, appreciate Matt's information on the Riverside Crossing Park design update that's at 90% design, and hence some of the previous decisions you were making about moving some of this funding up so that we can save some funding and help with construction sequencing and the like. So just want to make sure that that was cross-referenced with some of your earlier decisions. And then the last is there was a mobility update put into the packet, and I appreciate staff really standing back and putting that whole comprehensive package together. I know there's been a lot of pieces and parts between Forever Dublin initiatives and also with our mobility with some of our businesses and otherwise, and some of the smart cities initiatives. and the like, that they did a great job of pulling all that together. So with that, unless you have any questions, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
I had a question about, so Dana, thoughts about when to bring that back? I know we've gotten some additional grants to continue to work on that pilot, but to bring that back with some, moving from a pilot to a more either permanent or not do it, or whatever that decision is, to bring that back to council. What's the current thinking about that?
I don't really know. I don't have an answer. Let me check and advise on that. I think we're really still trying to sort out, number one, the fact that we got it, which was great, and two, now that we caught the bus, what do we do with it? So we've got a lot of great ideas. I think we got to narrow those down and get to what execution is going to look like with that money.
So another sort of 6-month pilot phase continuation. Okay.
We will definitely report out on that.
Great.
And Megan, you are a superstar for delivering that bridge on budget. I mean, as complicated as that thing is, it's got to be one of the most complex projects I've seen here in 30 years, run by the city and not by outside developers. To coordinate those 5 different entities and to bring that thing in on budget is absolutely amazing. So we all owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you.
Anything else, Dana?
No, sir. That's all.
Okay, committee reports. P&Z, Jane? How about admin? Chris?
No, I gave a report on our appointment.
Community development. John?
Community development met on November the 6th. For just about an hour and 15 minutes, we had 3 items. One item was short-term rentals. I would say our legal counsel will be coming back with that, and it looks like from some of the discussion that there's going to be a registration fee and that it's going to be limited to 2 weeks. And a number of people spoke very articulately on the problems they were suffering from the ones that were surrounding them currently. And we also had some good feedback from the audience, so which we're going to incorporate into the ordinance. Next item was short temporary and commercial signage, which will probably end up down at P&Z because there's all kinds of levels of signage and size, shapes, and everything else. So that will be heading over to P&Z. Last item was the streetscape tree selection in historic Dublin. And what we would like to do as a committee, and we hope you support us on this, is that the trees stay the same on each street so that they actually perform a function as beautifying the street and unifying all the different kinds of architecture. We didn't realize until Matt showed us that the law was changed when I was out of the government, by the way, because I wrote the original law in 1993. And so this variation of trees, which seems to be rather confusing, of ups, downs, different shapes and heights, appeared. So we weren't aware of that, but we would like the city to go back to grouping the trees on each street to try to get that uniformity of architectural integrity so that there's a psychological commonness again. So we're hoping that we go back to that. And should a disease come in, something like the emerald ash borer, we'll only lose a street tree. And that would be better than having a picket fence with all the pickets knocked out here and there, which is sort of the current look that a lot of cities have adopted. So we're trying to get back to that more architecturally integrated uniform patterning. So that's what we've discussed, and that's what we sort of decided on. Wouldn't that be correct? Any other comments?
I would only add that, we reviewed that legislation afterwards, and I think the legislation should be reviewed, but I think you can read it either way, that the trees could be consistent by street rather than, it's really a problem that we manufactured. We, instead of having Oak Street, Maple Street, Elm Street, we made every street in the city Ash Street, right? And so that was a problem that we created by our own contentness to overuse a single tree. So we can look at the language. I don't know that it precludes us from doing what it is we want to do. I think it could be read in that fashion. So.
And that's common to almost all the cities had ash trees, about 20 to 25% of them, a lot of them, because they could take the urban stress really well and grow between a sidewalk and a street and really do well and flourish and have a nice head. So Now, it's nothing that our department's, at fault. It's just was, and then they invented a huge number of hybrids with red leaves and everything else, and became a very popular tree. Who knew that some boards would arrive from China in a pallet in Michigan and wipe out all the ash trees in America, so. Okay?
So the follow-up for that was that I think staff was going to bring back a comprehensive sort of landscape back to the.
For the historic district.
For the historic district.
A
So
street
that was the-
treescape for the historic district was my
And
understanding.
we were also thinking about, when they do that, to increase the cadence of them, so tighten up the lineal footage between the trees to give us more of instead of just having 6 trees, which was the whole discussion, maybe we could add some additional trees to both sides.
What I'm going to ask Matt to do is repeat back to you what we think the motion is to make sure we're really clear for the record on what we're
Okay.
going to do. So would you articulate that back?
Yeah, I will selfishly request, though, for South High Street, we recognize its importance and its, and it's the feel that we're looking for. We are under great constraints conditionally to be able to plant what we want and to get it to look the way we want it. I would almost recommend a site visit down there to tour it, to take a look at it, so we can have a better idea of what options we might have. I would welcome that with the committee, or council as a full, however you please to do that.
Schedule our next
No, that'd be
committee meeting
great.
there.
Yeah. We'll come down with a handful of flags and flag out all your trees for you.
Read my mind.
We'll do it for you, free of charge.
So we'll do that, and we'll also, from what I'm understanding, we'll bring some amended language back to you for consideration for the street tree code in itself, just to clarify what Vice Mayor Amos Grims was referring to,
Great.
if you wish.
Thank you.
And Matt, then you will bring back a designed streetscape for the trees?
After the site visit, yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Anything else, John?
That's it.
Finance, Mike?
Thank you.
Yes, we had a hotel motel tax grant applications meeting on the 13th. We had a very good, robust group and came up with consensus, at least at the committee level, which we'll report on next meeting. Matthew, you have some other homework to do as a result of that. Thank you.
Public Services Committee. Christina?
Nothing this time.
Coda, Kathy?
Just one quick thing, that today, the new Customer Service Center opened at 33 North High. The redesign, I had a chance to see that. Well, there'll be a ribbon cutting at the board meeting this Wednesday, but it really has changed the really focus of that from coming in to buy a ticket to come in to figure out how to solve mobility needs, and it's quite a lovely design. So I encourage folks, if you're downtown, check it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Dublin Friendship Association, Christina?
Nothing. We meet tomorrow.
Morpsey, Chris?
Yeah, we had an executive meeting and a board meeting last week. I did, we've talked a lot about the PACE financing, and Thea Walsh sits on the board that does the PACE financing, and she offered to take back to the board some of the difficulties that we were having and why the costs were running so high. So hopefully we'll see some movement in that area. She was going to, I think, be reaching out to you, Matt. I think I gave her your contact information to just get an idea of the things that we were having to do, and you as well, Jennifer, for those PACE financing, see if they can't streamline that process on their end a little bit. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Logan Union, Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, Kathy?
Yeah, the annual dinner and meeting is this Thursday, and staff and I will be attending. A lot of activities, so it should be a great evening.
Northwest 33 Corridor Group, Kathy and Jane?
Nothing.
Nothing? Dublin Arts Council, John?
Yeah, one of the great Japanese artists is back, Masayuki, and his studio is actually by Mishuko, our sister city. And let's see, we opened him up here last week. I think it was on Tuesday night. That was the opening of his exhibit. And many of you have collected his works, which are very, very interesting. And he's got a new line of ceramics out that's really beautiful. So I know you're all probably familiar with having him back I guess we've had him here for 3 or 4 times. Fantastic artist. So if you get a chance, stop in the Dublin Arts Building and take a look at his work.
Great, thanks, John. Dublin Board of Education, Christina?
Nothing this time.
I do not see my friends from Washington Township, so I don't think we have anything.
AWOL.
To report. I guess they're AWOL. Dublin Bridges, Jane? How about we stay right there with you with Roundtable?
just want to bring up or ask the question of, I know we've talked about property maintenance codes, and I know we're working on that sort of thing, but there's been a conversation around the existing vacant properties. And I had brought up to Dana and Jennifer that there is a vacant building ordinance that 116 different communities in Ohio have now started to use to stop allowing vacant buildings to just fall into disrepair. I grew up on the west side of Columbus, and my own home is a vacant building right now. And what happens is if we leave these vacant buildings up, they decrease the property values next to them. You lose tax revenue. Starts to change the neighborhood. It becomes almost epidemic sometimes. I don't anticipate that's going to happen in Dublin, but it does happen in cities. Vacant buildings just left like that without any kind of demand for the cost being borne by the person who owns the building to repair it, ends up degrading the neighborhood pretty quickly. So I'm encouraging us to get that maintenance code, a new one, up and going, and look at the vacant building ordinance as a possibility of registration by a landowner. And those can be not necessarily burdensome for people who are trying to renovate or rent. In fact, you can actually use the ordinance to incentivize people to do something with a vacant building. So if we can work together to do that, I would be so appreciative.
Yeah, we've met with planning staff. It's my understanding that that is a pending topic for Public Services Committee, and we had a meeting and it was set to be rescheduled, and I don't think that's been rescheduled yet. Anne's shaking her head
Okay.
no. So it is a topic that's up for consideration.
Yeah, I think it could be a very easy, quite an easy fix, especially since the maintenance code that we're under now, I think is 2009, and there's a 2019 International Maintenance Code that gives us a lot more protections on the exterior of our buildings as well as interiors sometimes. Okay, thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Jen. Kathy?
Just one thing, I wanted to say thanks so much for the city staff. I know I'd commented a few times about leave pickup, and I know with all the snow how difficult it was. I can say they were in my neighborhood on Sunday picking these up, and so they are working overtime, and it's hard work, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciated that. That's a lot, so thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. John?
Matt, bring your favorite trees, and we'll meet downtown, and we'll have a staking party. So looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
Mike?
Nothing?
Christina?
I'm good.
Chris?
Just Veterans Day was a really nice celebration for us to, they did an excellent job of executing that, so that was really nice to see with the kids. I wanted to thank Senator Coonsey for really sending us the notes, and it was amazing when you sit around a table with other electeds. Not every senator sends out those letters and says, give me your ideas of what you want in the budget, and so I appreciate that. And then wanted to congratulate the honorees for the Irish Festival for this year. That was certainly a nice opportunity to recognize them. That's all. Thank you.
It was a great meeting, and you really realize how many people in this community are involved in the Irish Festival that have nothing to do with the staff or any of us. I mean, it is a Dublin community event. The only other thing I have is to encourage everyone, Wednesday night at 4 o'clock at the Dublin Integrated Education Center out at OU, we will be taking a minute to pause and thank our friend Mike Keenan for 36, I always get it wrong, it tells me it's more than it is. This is now like 450 years of service, I think.
Methuselah.
1,782
Methuselah
meetings.
Mike Keenan.
But who's counting? But in all seriousness, please come out and take a minute to express appreciation to Mike for everything he's done for this community. Dana.
Mayor, I'm sorry, and I apologize to Michelle for this, but this is Michelle's last council meeting, 27 years of being in this room and attending council meetings. I don't know how many years that equals in dog years or whatever, but anyway, I can sign up for that too. I know exactly what that means. So anyway, but I just want to publicly acknowledge Michelle for all her work as well, and we will certainly, standing O for sure, yeah. We'll be celebrating Michelle's.
Is that the 10th?
For sure.
December 10th?
10th, yes.
Michelle, I told you I grew up in Hilliard. They're tough down there.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned.